Think about a time when you've been seen or heard, and how did that make you feel at some point in your life? Because we rarely so often do that. And if we have time at the end, I'd like for us to share some of those experiences. Years as a hospice chaplain, I've observed on numerous occasions the pain of not being seen. No human connection, no empathy, no tender eye to eye connection, even to show that the caregiver bore witness to the pain of another person. I can only imagine how much pain those caregivers were in to cause them to respond the way they did, how much it cost them to focus their heart on other things instead of another human being in crisis. And unfortunately, I've seen this often in nursing homes around our city, which is where most of my hospice patients are. There's a preciousness about life that we've lost and must recapture. Our sight's been dimmed, blurred, blinded. Somewhere along the way, for so many complex reasons, we've increasingly stopped seeing one another as human beings, as exquisite extensions of ourselves, as heart to my heart needing decency, love, and care. We don't seem to fully see one another as humans anymore, even when we need to the most. Well, I've always believed a greater adventure is calling us, and it's an inner adventure. The real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes, 19th century Marcel Proust said. So I believe now more than ever, ever since that chaplain asked, or that patient asked me that question many years ago, that our deepest need is to be seen. Seeing someone clearly, I think, is a sacred moment. There is pain associated with not being seen. In her wonderful book, Anything We Love Can Be Saved, Alice Walker writes and asks, how do we fall back in love with everything around us so that we can even want to begin to save it? How do we again see people, see our environment, and all of life is precious and deserving of our reverence? We begin, I think, with the intention to see all life as sacred. I have discovered over the years that hurt people hurt people. Loving people love people. So it often is an inside job. We have to begin with ourselves and have that pain that we often carry from childhood even in a healing modality. And that helps us then open us to see ourselves so that we can see each other's more clearly. And sometimes I think when we feel humbled and shaken, as I have numerous times watching the world news, feel humbled and shaken by our inhumanity, our heart can be awakened again. The radical psychiatrist R.D. Laing said that the treatment is how you treat someone. A comment that struck a deep chord with me when I first heard it back in grad school, when I got a counseling degree at University of Illinois. The great psychologist Carl Jung once remarked to a student, "It is what you are that heals, not what you do." Now, these two prominent therapists had both come to appreciate that there is a crucial difference between what a healer does and who he or she is. While techniques may be necessary and helpful, the quality of presence, the state of beingness of the healer brings is perhaps the most important factor of all. Years ago, I was preparing a devotional for St. Lucianetta Methodist Church. And I was thinking about Mark chapter 10, verse 21. It's a passage of Jesus kind of going on his way, as he often did. And there was this guy, this dude in his head, as guys tend to be, women too, but mostly guys, thinking, how can I get into heaven? How can I get into heaven? He was called the rich young ruler. And he was chasing after Jesus. What struck me about that passage is Jesus heard him. Jesus turned. The scripture says Jesus turned to look at him and loved him and said, and I didn't even go beyond what he said. in the woods where I often go for reflection, I was struck by Jesus turned to him and looked at him and loved him. Now, back in the day when I was a Greek geek, I had a Greek thesaurus. So I opened it up. And the Greek thesaurus said, when Jesus turned and looked at him and loved him, it said, Jesus beheld him. To be fully present, and to hold someone in your consciousness. Now, I've had friends who've had gurus before, and they tell me a similar experience that when somebody holy of any persuasion or religion looks into you, you know you're busted. They can see everything. And we know what we're hiding, what we did, what we said even years ago. And it really struck me because I took the time to sit with this. What would it be like for someone like Jesus, whether you believe he's the Son of God or the greatest avatar that ever walked the face of the earth? What would it be like for the eyes of Jesus to look into your eyes and he loved you? About anything that you feel shameful for, he loved you. I can't believe how powerful that is. I think the most heartfelt thing we can do for one another is to behold that person. Something told me that patient in that hospital bed probably didn't have family or enough friends in his life. He was in his late 30s, by the way, so he didn't have a long life. Nobody really took the time to see him. Unfortunately, like I said, I see that playing out in nursing homes all too much. I know it plays out in homes around our city. You know that too. A lot of my friends are therapists and their offices are very busy. And I think of a lot of wounded adults that are walking around now because of that. They've never been seen, they've never been heard, and the wounds that they still carry from childhood. People respond to how we behold them in our consciousness. We don't have to say anything, they sense how they perceive them. Too often, we only view people in terms of our needs and our hidden agendas. People flock to Jesus, I believe, as they flock to His Holiness the Dalai Lama, as they flock to some of these other gurus I didn't even know about, but my friends follow them. They flock to them because they didn't see them as rich or poor, male or female, black or white, gay or straight or transgender. They saw them as brothers and sisters. They beheld them. Held. Was life-changing, especially in that moment. People really don't do that with our cell phones and our watches and our schedules and such that we're always going through. And I remember two experiences I want to share with you. One was when I was on part of the production team. We came up with this idea, didn't make any money, so only did it 2 years. It was called Serendipity Festival. And it was a 3-day yoga and music festival that we had out in Cloverdale. So this was the second year, 2014. We always had a booth like a lot of other groups during monumental yoga. But there was this older guy. I still remember what he looks like. Very dignified, maybe 70, late 70s. And I would watch him out of the corner of my eye going around very slowly. Then he came to our booth, and here's what he did. And I still remember this man to this day. He approached me as he did everyone else, and he took his hand out, and I took his hand out. Then he put his other hand on my hand. And he said, "May I ask your name?" Richard, with a question mark. And he looked at me like he saw me. And he said, "I want you to know how thankful I am for the light that you're shining in our community and the work that you're doing for all of us." And he waited a little bit. I didn't know what to say. And then he moved on to the next person. And then the next person. We're all dumbfounded. And one of us said, "Who was that man?" We called him the Lone Ranger of Love because we didn't even have another term for that. But he made that kind of difference. All the people I've met, all the people that have come into my life, that man made that kind of difference. And in that moment, I felt like that rich young ruler. And I don't even know what this man's background was. But I knew that he saw me and he loved me. He beheld me. And I thought that was powerful. And the last story I want to share, and by the way, I couldn't find the slide for her, but I have a picture of her. I want to share a story. I'll try to keep it brief of the bag lady in Brownsburg. Back in the 80s, when I got ordained in ministry, yes, I'm that old, mid 80s. I was a young man when I got ordained. And that was back in the day when we had Burger Chef. Remember Burger Chef? Oh, yeah. And the Burger Chef in Brownsburg. If those of you are familiar with Brownsburg back in the day, Brownsburg's totally changed. Well, Brownsburg had a lady, kind of chubby. She looked poor. She looked like somebody you'd see on the streets of Indianapolis. And she'd always be pushing a shopping cart, shuffling, pushing a shopping cart filled with stuff, as I sometimes see people do in Garfield Park. Stuff they find. I don't know if they're going to use it or not. And people would always drive by and not say a word. And people would call her, oh, you know, that bag lady, that bag lady. And said, oh, the bag lady. We have a bag lady in Brownsburg? Really? And here I was, you know, Mr. Sophistication, trying to be the associate minister. And I had very important appointments to go to. And sometimes I would drive by her and, oh, I would, of course, pray for her like very spiritual people try to do. But I would kind of move on. Then one day, I went into Burger Chef to get some coffee, and she was sitting in the back corner. And I decided, you know, you really should go up to her. And so I did. And I said, ma'am, may I sit here with you? And without looking up, she said, uh-huh, uh-huh. And she kind of slowly drank her hot chocolate. I found out later that that's all she ever responded to was, uh-huh, uh-huh. I did get that her name was Mildred. And we didn't talk much. I could tell she felt very awkward, maybe on a spectrum or something. But I just felt like she's somebody I need to know because of how people would talk about her. So I saw her. I saw her about another week. I went in purposely to sit down with Mildred. And then I told my friend Sandy Mesick, wherever she is today. And she was a nurse, but she had a heart like a saint. And I said, Sandy, there's this lady that people jokingly call a bag lady. And I think that's so cruel, but her name is Mildred. Would you be willing to reach out to her? And she said, absolutely. So long story short, Sandy reached out to her, slowly gained her friendship, slowly was invited into the dilapidated house. I think it's where the American Legion thing is now, right now, on that main street in Brownsburg. Come to find out, she had a wheelchair-bound brother named Paul. Never got out. The house smelled. It was like they were hoarders. Somehow they were surviving. Sandy began to adopt both of them. She began to have a group from the church begin to reach out to them and pick them up and take them to church or make meals for them or what have you. And over a period of months, as I would continue to see Mildred, I saw slowly someone begin to blossom. She still stuttered, but she was feeling loved. And I remember one day when she walked up to me and she said, Pastor, I said, yes, Mildred. She said, I baked you a chocolate pie and it was sloshing around, you know? And I didn't want to hurt her feelings. So I said, oh, I had tears in my eyes. Then I said, oh, Mildred, thank you so much. I can't wait to try it when I take it home. The senior minister, Larry Belleville, I want to give credit to him. He's still alive. He became their guardian. The elders got together and he said, we need to take care of this family, help them out. What we found out is that they were sitting on some pretty wealthy property. So they sold the house with all the money, had a fund just for Mildred and Paul, and we put them in the finest assisted living that Hendricks County had. Here's the change going on in Mildred. So fast forward, in towns like Brownsburg, homecoming is a big deal. You got the football players on the fire truck and you got all these convertibles, you know, and homecoming princesses and queens and things like that. And my kids, very young at the time, my oldest son, who's like 6'1", he was about like this. We had this running joke when we went to things like that. Who's going to get the most Tootsie Rolls? We both love Tootsie Rolls. And so this parade's going on, and someone in a car threw out a handful of Tootsie Rolls. And I remember like it was yesterday, and we both dove down, kind of jokingly trying to fight for these Tootsie Rolls. And it was amazing. And I looked up into the corner of my eye while I'm on my knees, and I look up, and I see a convertible, again, passing by, homecoming queen, but it had the name of the assisted living. And I looked up even more. there was Mildred. She was voted the homecoming queen. You should have seen her. She had that weird smile and, hey, and crown trying to fall off. And I started crying. My tears flew down, and I call the voice God, not schizophrenic, but I heard the voice, and the voice said, I'll love you if produces problems. I'll love you no matter what produces prophets and kings and even homecoming queens. And I will never, ever forget that moment. Now, before I go to like I call it a prose prayer, would anybody like to share a moment they had when somebody truly saw you in a way you'd never been seen before? I know you don't normally do this during a service, but someone. And if not, that's okay. Few times with my hospice team, you don't have to bow your heads for this. And your God can be anything you want that God to be. Oftentimes for me, my God is a beautiful oak tree that's in Garfield Park. Dear God, my guide of love and light and all that is sacred, I've spent too much time seeing through darkened eyes, eyes that are judgmental, eyes that keep me apart from others. I no longer want to stay in this cold, lonely place. Give me new eyes to fully see the preciousness around me. Every day, I have the opportunity to see what's really true, to see what really matters. Let me see as I've never seen before, the true divine essence of all. Give me new sight so I can fall in love with the beauty and tenderness and connectedness of all. Please let me open my eyes wide to see the gift within, to be love. St. Francis of Assisi once said, the one you've been looking for is the one who is looking. The love we have been seeking is inside us. Please give me new eyes so I can recognize and delight in and be the love inside myself. And please give me new eyes that I can recognize and delight in and truly see the love inside others. Let me rise into love with all that is. Let me see all is sacred. Let me see with a loving heart. Let me see that God, divine, source, is in all things. St. Francis walked the hills of Assisi. He stopped in front of a cherry tree and he said, "Oh, little tree, speak to me of God." And the little tree burst into bloom. Soften my eyes so that I can see that we're all blossoms of God. Make my eyes so tender that whenever I look on someone else, or whenever I watch the moon at night, or whenever I see the blue heron along the river, or whenever I look on those right before me, I will see you looking right back at me. Blessed be.